Welcome to Bobby Owsinski's Inner Circle. I'm Bobby Owsinski, and this is a show all about music, music production, and the music business. My guest today is engineer and TapeOp founder Larry Crane. But first, the music business has a whole lot to celebrate because Spotify just announced that it's up to 28 million paid subscribers. Now, this is up from about 20 million last June, so in 6 months it added 8 million subscribers. Why is that a big deal? The more paying subscribers to streaming music, the larger the pot is for musicians, artists, bands, songwriters, record labels, publishers, everybody in the music business. Ideally, the goal is about 100 million paid subscribers worldwide. And the idea behind it is that many would offset the number of downloads and the number of CD sales that are being lost every year. So we're not quite to that point yet, but 28 million just from Spotify alone is a big step in the right direction. Now, one of the reasons why this is happening is Spotify was pretty smart, and they instituted a $5 a month, I guess it's $4.95, subscription just for students. And first of all, this is not that much money, so every student can afford it, and it also gets them in the mindset of paying for streaming music, the mindset for paying for music, and it also shows them just how effective streaming music can be, a paid service for streaming music. So this is a pretty good idea, also from the standpoint that many industry pundits and experts have said for a long time that $5 a month is about the right price. We've talked about that here many times. $5 a month for streaming is the right price for most consumers. When you get beyond that, there is some price sensitivity. So $9.95 is never a good idea. Mostly it's there because the major record labels insist of that price point. But really, if all the services were around $5, that would expand the number of paying customers significantly. Another thing that's kind of interesting is the fact that Apple Music just announced it's up to 11 million paid subscribers. So between Apple Music and between Spotify, we're almost at 40 million paid subscribers. That's 40 million out of the 100 million. So it's moving in the right direction. And like I say, pretty soon there's going to be a lot more money for everybody involved in the music business. One of the interesting things about this is the fact that streaming music has killed piracy dead. You never hear or read about anything that has to do with piracy for the most part. That's because there's no real reason to do it. When there's so much music at your fingertips, why steal it when you can have it for free or for very little money without the hassle? So piracy is kind of dead in the water now, thankfully. Another thing that happened this week that was somewhat significant was the fact that YouTube bought BandPage. Now, what is BandPage? BandPage allows you to set up an online store on most social sites, social media sites, and it allows you to monetize your online presence. Now, what was interesting about this was it was bought by YouTube for $8 million, but the investors in BandPage had put in about $24 million, so it was bought at a bargain. What happened was, originally when BandPage came out in 2009, I think, it was there to build a custom tab on your Facebook page. So in other words, what would happen is you would have this tab that would allow you to sell merch on your Facebook page. The problem was in 2012, Facebook shut all of those apps down. And as a result, BandPage went from being very successful to having no customers almost overnight. So they basically pivoted, and instead of going after just Facebook, they went after all social media sites, which kind of worked, and they have a lot of major clients, but the fact of the matter is that they were sold for a bargain price, which kind of means that they weren't making that much money to begin with. But anyway, if you're a BandPage customer, know that things are going to change now that YouTube is in control. If you're not a BandPage customer, it's worth checking out because it is a cool app. If you have any questions or comments, send them to questions@BobbyOwnerCircle.com. I just launched a new mini coaching program, and it's called Lead and Background Vocal Mixing Tricks, as well as a live mixing workshop where I'll personally help you with your mixes. You can go to BobbyOwsinskiCourses.com to learn more, BobbyOwsinskiCourses.com. More good news for musicians is the fact that it's getting easier to carry your instruments on a plane. Now, up until recently, and actually the end of last year, what would happen is if you came to the airport with your gig bag, the airlines did not have to let it on the aircraft, and many times would make you check it as baggage, which obviously we know is not a good idea for a stringed instrument, especially a very expensive one. That all changed with the new law that basically says that if you arrive at the airport with a gig bag with an instrument, the airline has to let you on the aircraft with it as long as it fits in the overhead bin. And that's the real key. It has to fit in the overhead bin. The other alternative is now you can actually pay for a seat for your instrument if you care that much about it, that you're willing to pay for it. Once again, you could try to do this prior to the end of last year, but the airline didn't necessarily have to sell you that ticket. Now they do. So this is really good news for people that are traveling with their instruments. One note of caution, however, the airline doesn't give you priority just because you have a musical instrument. So if you're in boarding group number 5, you get on the plane and there's no more baggage space, you're kind of stuck. What that means is it behooves you to get into an earlier boarding group, even if that means buying a priority ticket or buying priority boarding, which costs you a little bit more money, but it's worth it if you can make sure that your instrument gets on the flight with you. My guest today is a great engineer and one of the founders of TapeOp magazine, Larry Crane. TapeOp is one of the most beloved magazines in the industry, but Larry has some pretty significant engineering credits that include Elliott Smith, Sleater Kinney, Death Cab for Cutie, and the Semerists, among others. I spoke with Larry from his home in Portland via Skype. Portland is such a great music scene.
Yeah.
And you've been a big part of it for a long time. Did you grow up in Portland?
No, I grew up in Northern California, actually. And I was born in Berkeley and raised in Oakland for a while when I was a little kid. And then I grew up near Nevada City in that area. And then I went to college in Chico, California. And that's kind of where I started playing in bands and stuff. But then when I turned 30, I moved here. The band I was in broke up and I moved up to Portland, Oregon to get out of the music world.
Get out of the music world?
I wanted to get out of the music world.
Were you engineering by that point?
No, not at all, actually. I mean, I've always recorded, like in the early, like in 81, I was like part of that home cassette movement, of trading tapes and stuff, making weird music at home. And like when I was in high school still. Yeah. And then I always had, like when a 4-track cassettes came out, my friends and my family pitched in money and bought me one because they knew I was really into that.
Yeah.
And so I was always recording people on that and recording my own band, like demos and stuff. And I never thought about it as something as a career at all. It just was something that sort of fell together.
How did it happen as a career?
Well, I moved into a house and it had a big basement and I started building a room in there just to rehearse in. And then someone dropped off some 4-track reel-to-reels that their uncle had given them, a musician I was working with. It's like, hey, you want to borrow these? And I started recording stuff on that. And people would come by like, hey, can you record this for me? And pretty soon I had bought an 8-track reel-to-reel just to do stuff. And it started just turning into more people coming over, There was a demand, I had to learn it all, like, in my early 30s. I didn't know how to set a mic level.
Yeah, but how did you do that? Did you have a mentor, or was it just like a mad dash to find out as much as you can?
A little of both. I mean, when I was in the band I was in was called the Vomit Launch, actually, in the 80s and early 90s. And when I was doing that, we made 4 records. And the first 2 we made with a guy named Greg Freeman, who had been in a band called Pell Mell and also was the bass player for The Call way back.
Yeah.
And he had a simple studio, like an 8-track Otari and some pretty interesting gear. But, he just liked music. And so I kind of would watch him work. And we did a few records with him. Then we did 2 records with John Bacigalupi, who's now my partner in TapeOp. And John was an engineer, producer. And so I would kind of be the liaison between the band and the producer engineer most of the time. I would come in with a list of overdubs and I would map out, everything. I'd make 4-track demos of our stuff with the band. And, so I was always doing that stuff. I just didn't think of it as anything but a means to an end. for making music. And gosh, so I kind of had watched those guys work, but I never really watched the technical end. But I knew, where people put mics. I knew the process of making a record, like how to do the basic tracking and then do the overdubbing, and everything all made a lot of sense to me. Multi-tracking completely made sense to me from a very young age. So it was all kind of like in front of me all the time.
It's interesting. It seems like every band always has one member that takes on those duties that you did.
Mm-hmm. I was also kind of managing the band. I was booking tours. We had a P.O. box. We did mail order stuff.
Wow.
We put out our own records, things like that. So I was really busy.
Yeah. But I mean, in the studio where someone, is always doing the demos, is the liaison with the producer, the engineer, and eventually in all the interviews that I do, and probably it's the same with the ones that you do as well, you find out that that's the way people sort of get into the business. Many of them anyway.
I don't think I ever would have been. I'm really not that obsessed with recording equipment at all. Like people might think, you've got this nice studio and then you're so into the equipment. I want to write an end rant for the magazine where I say like, I hate recording equipment. Honestly, I don't care. People walk up to me and start talking about Neve numbers, and I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know which ones those are. I just don't care. It's just a tool.
Yeah.
My mom was an artist, and so I was raised around this art sort of mentality, of like get good tools and work hard, and it's just, the recording equipment, I like good things and things that make the job easy and things that sound good. But, just really, I'm not obsessed. I don't have a lot of vintage stuff. I don't really think that's an important thing to have to do, or, so to me, it's just like, I use the stuff. I mean, the whole studio, I didn't want to have a studio, but I wanted to help my friends make records, It's the same kind of mentality.
Okay. How did the studio come about then?
And the home studio I had got so busy that my roommates were losing their minds, We'd have metal bands in the basement, whatever, punk rock, people sleeping on the floors. It was a little much, So in 1996, I started looking around for a space, and I ended up hooking up with Elliott Smith because he was also looking for a space to put up a studio, and we had the same exact idea, like 16 track, 2-inch tape. We wanted the same kind of thing. And so we joined forces. It was still going to be my studio, but he would work out of there with a prorated deal, and just bring his gear over and have a place to work. Because I wasn't sure that I was going to be able to keep the place 100% busy. That was kind of my worry or fear, which was soon found out to not be true. But it was great. So we started, we built the place together and worked on some of his projects, and I'd work on my records I was making for people. And we both got really busy. And that, we found a nice small commercial space that was really cheap, like $500 a month.
Is it the same space you have now?
No, they tore it down a number of years ago. I moved into my new space in 2007, and that was built custom up from the ground up by some friends of mine who own the property and stuff. So that's pretty nice to have a good landlord.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Well, not only that, it's nice to be able to do it from the ground up.
Mm-hmm.
And let's face it, that's happening less and less these days.
I think we're like one of the few studios in town, built to be a studio.
Yeah.
It's not a retrofitted building. And when you get to do that, you can work on the dimensions and ceiling height and run the electrical. Like all of our electrical runs up in the walls and drops down to the outlet, and it's all covered in conduit within the wall,
Yeah.
And all the audio runs underground and pops up in the boxes there for tie lines. So it's
perfect.
It's clean.
Yeah. No, that's very, very cool. How did you decide on the gear?
It's changed over the years massively. There's probably just a couple SM57s left from the original studio. Initially, it was like whatever we could afford. I was buying like I had a Mackie 32x8 console and a 16-track MCI and a DAP machine.
Yeah.
But all that's gone. But the DAP machine's still floating around, but that's pretty useless. And it just really has been like a discovery of better equipment as time's gone by. I remember my first tube condenser mic and just being like, oh my God, that's what that sounds like,
Yeah.
And at this point, it's a really well-equipped studio, and a lot of it's from manufacturers I've met through doing TapeOp,
Yeah.
a lot of the boutique companies that are around these days.
Yeah, there's a lot of them. And you know what impresses me is how into it they are. And when it's not so much about money, and it's very much like what we do on the musical side, where, hey, let's face it, if we want to make money, we go someplace else. We go into another industry.
I tell people that all the time, because people making boutique equipment is just a struggle. It's some of them do okay, but they're just constantly working, and it's not like you're making millions or something, because your profit margin can only be a certain amount. The supplies to build good stuff cost money. There's no way around it.
Yeah. But they're doing it for the love of audio. Most of them, anyway, come from a good place. And
I think so.
Yeah, I mean, we can get into bigger players like Avid and stuff like that, which I don't think are coming from a particularly great place these days. But
the thing, like I always tell people with our magazine, the thing is that the owners run it, and we've always been that way. And when you have a boutique company that's been owned by the same person for 20 years, then there's a vision and there's a stability.
Yeah.
Other companies are run differently, and that's the multi-headed beast or whatever.
Yeah, right.
Beast.
Well, let's talk about TapeOp for a second.
Sure.
How did that get started?
That same journey, when I had the home studio, I was trying to learn stuff. I was going to the library every day, and I was reading, magazines and books and taking stuff home. And I would go to the bookstore and I'd buy magazines, like the Mix and EQ and Electronic Musician and everything that was out there recording. And I just felt like they weren't talking about the kind of music that my friends and I were making, which would ostensibly be kind of like underground or indie or college radio type music, or just more weird music,
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, I could start. I had been writing for years for music magazines, like real zine style stuff, just doing record reviews and interviews with artists. And I thought, there's plenty of that kind of journalism out there, but what about journalism from that approach that's writing about recording, interview people that make recordings and not be all focused on the equipment end of it, but instead to look at it from a creative and artistic point of view, because I didn't feel like the other magazines were looking at it that way.
Yeah.
So it was 1996. I went and Xeroxed a bunch and folded them at home.
Okay, so what was your circulation when you started?
I mean, as many as I could print in a given day. Seriously, my ex-wife worked at Planned Parenthood, and I would go down there on the weekend when the office was empty, and I would write them like a $200 donation and then use their photocopier. Kind of crazy.
Were you charging for it, or was it free at first?
I was sending a lot of free ones out to bands and labels and studios I knew about, and then was putting it on sale at Target and bookstores around town, like Powell's Books here in Portland and places like that. Super Digital is like a recording equipment store. I put a little box on the counter and sold them direct there. So I kind of just got them around. I've always been good at figuring out how to network and how to promote things. And it comes from running like an indie rock label way back.
Yeah.
Like you made 1,000 albums, you send out 500 promos, to radio and magazines. You don't just sit on them.
Well, it's the same thing for me. When I first started writing books, it was coming from a place of I wanted to learn something.
Mm-hmm.
And
absolutely.
I figured that the best way, and really it was, if I want to learn this, I think there's a bunch of other people that do as well. And that proved to be the case,
totally
much
true.
like...
And, I mean, I think even through the magazine, I've learned a lot.
Yeah.
It's 20 years old this year, this spring.
Really?
But I've learned a lot, and I've got to interview people, and I'd walk away and go, "Oh, wow, okay, that's a concept, of some kind of technique or just whatever, how to produce people." You hear those stories.
Yeah, definitely.
You learn a lot, and I find that it really help me grow as an engineer and a producer.
No, I can understand, definitely. Who was the best interview?
I think the most significant to me was getting to interview Brian Eno. Because I've been kind of like this goal ever since I'd started. Like, I'll never be able to do this, but I want to talk to Brian Eno. And going and visiting him at his studio in Portobello and just hanging out, I was like, oh, this is amazing. Here I am. but a lot of other people have been really fascinating, like David Byrne was really fun to talk to, and T-Bone Burnett, really, really interesting and wise. Jim Dickinson, I didn't actually even do the interview for our magazine, but hanging out with him and later at our TapeOp Con events and stuff, he was a real, he'd say funny things and I'd be like, that's a crazy comment. And then 2 years later, I'd be like, I get it. I get what he said,
Yeah.
So, it was really, it's those kind of things are really amazing, meeting people like that and learning from them.
Were there any that disappointed you? And you don't have to name names, but just out of curiosity.
Sometimes people who make great records are not very articulate. Yeah. I had one recently and I love the guy, but it just didn't really, the interview was really hard to edit. I finished that one. There's been interviews I just thrown away because I look at it and I go, this is just a jumbled mess of incomplete sentences and half thoughts, and it doesn't really portray the person behind it,
One of the things I learned when I first started doing interviews, and I did maybe 500 before I started to write a book, because I was writing for all the magazines, right? And one of the things I learned was people want you to translate what they're saying. They don't want you to take it literally, because the one time I did that, the feedback I got when I sent it for approval was, "Hey, you make me sound like a truck driver." And I was like, well, that's the way you talk. I'm sorry. But I took it back and I said, well, I know what you want to say. So I just made him say that. And then he was over the moon. And I kind of realized that was, something that a good writer has to do as well, but you have to be able to use their voice. So that's kind of the key, it can't be you, it has to be them.
Right. I've totally felt that. Like my wife does a lot of my proofreading and helps edit the magazine with me. And she's always like, she'll highlight something and put a little note, like clarify this or sometimes I'll send it back to people and go, do you want to add some sentences to this?
Yeah.
I think the idea is not, and this is the same way I would think about recording music, is like, the idea is not for, to capture the reality of what happened during that interview, but to capture the thoughts and intent behind it, Right. And I think about making a record the same way. I'm not there just to document the notes they're playing and everything. I'm there to help turn it into something people want to listen to.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, you have all those mentors, really, when all those interviews, all those people become mentors, which is what I always found. Just like you were saying, you pick up something from everybody, and sooner or later that comes into play. You're in the studio and you go, oh, yeah, okay, remember that.
Oh, yeah. I think about, talking to Tony Visconti, for instance, or something. You think about just even his demeanor when you're interviewing him makes you think that guy could be in charge of a session very gently and sternly at the same time, and so I think about those sort of things, like, how do I present myself at a session to get the job done, and do it right, but not be overbearing or too stern, and it's interesting that a lot of the really great producers have some sort of temperament and thing that they carry with them all the time that helps them take charge of a session without anyone being upset.
Yeah, right. Getting them to do what you want them to do, but making them think it's their idea.
Absolutely. It's kind of, guiding that gentle hand that's very, very stern.
Where do you see TapeOp going?
Well, 20 years, let's see. I mean, I kind of like more of the same, it just always more people to interview. There's always younger people popping up that are fascinating. I really, strive for more, wider breadth of coverage. It's easy for a magazine like this to fall into the, like, look at all the white males,
yeah, right.
category. So anything that's kind of like breaking that mold is always nice. But it's hard, sometimes it's hard to find like great women producers and engineers or such. There's less,
Yeah,
and
right.
So,
right.
Keep your eyes open for people that are coming from completely different backgrounds. Maybe people that are, I find a real interesting thing lately is like people who are coming from a very electronic and sample based style of music that are starting to work with full bands and musicians, and like Flying Lotus would be a really good example, or a Danger Mouse even, a few years back or something. And I think that's like Mark
Ronson.
Mark Ronson, right? See, that's a great example of someone coming from loop and DJ culture and and working with full bands and things, and to, as part of that, morphing it into something else too. I think that's really cool, and it's really good to keep your eyes open to that. The thing I hate is, like, we used to have this happen when we used to do the TapeOp cons, and there'd be a panel of producer engineers, and by the end of the panel, they're all, yeah, recording a band live to 16-track 2-inch is just the way to do it. And you're like, for some records, I mean, a jazz record or something, awesome,
Yeah.
But, show me one Stones record that was even made that way, like just live to tape, like it's just, it's this really frustrating, like, attitude of like, there's an honest way to make records and stuff. And I really like smashing that down and throwing that out the window, because people, I've been formulating this thought, but I think there's a tendency for a lot of producer or engineers to, especially people that think of themselves as engineers, to be really, really lazy and want to put it all back in the artist's hands and blame artists for not being good enough musicians, or they don't want to sit and do 100 overdubs to get a great vocal take or something. And I think it's just fear and laziness and not willing to voice an opinion and really commit. And, when you hear people talk about this, like, well, just the band should be ready and they should come in and they should knock it out and it should be perfect. And it's like, you're just a lazy, stupid engineer then if you're telling me that, because I know the reality of making records day in, day out is that rarely happens,
Funny you should mention, I have a very good friend who's won lots of Grammys, who was telling me about working with a very famous artist who's on television a lot. So I'm just going to leave it at that. And they're making a new record, and they came into his studio, and the whole band is playing live, and because that's the way he wanted it. Yeah. Which is no problem. But the fact of the matter was, he said they come in, they have no idea. They've never heard the song, and they put it together in a day. And he says for the first 5 hours, it's such chaos. And then all of a sudden it comes together. And he said, I haven't worked this hard in 20 years. But he was loving every minute of it because, again, everybody was coming from the same place, except for the artist who knew what the song was because he wrote it. But the rest of the band was coming from a place where, well, okay, let's just figure this out. That's pretty awesome, though.
Those are fun days. I mean, you're on your toes, and you're having to work really hard. But it's like when someone allows that process to be the process and works with it the right way, it's super fun. But it's hard work. Yeah.
But it's just like in Nashville, all those guys that they do the big tracking sessions where they have 9 people, and they do the same thing. They come in. They don't know the song. They listen to it. They write it out. Boom, done. 3 songs in 3 hours, and they're all great.
Yeah. Good players. They know how to play to the studio and play to the song,
No kidding. So one of the things I noticed is most of the reviews in TapeOp are fairly positive.
Yeah.
How do you deal with negative ones?
We don't run them.
Yeah.
I mean, we try to get a little bit of criticism in there to make a valid point here and there. But if something's so bad, a piece of equipment is so bad that, that there's just not much good to say about it, we kind of just shuttle it off and just tell the reviewer, like, forget about it. Then it'll die its own death, that product,
Yeah.
We one of the reasons I started the magazine in that way was that I said the review section to me is this. It's like you and me meeting after work in the studio all day, we're meeting for a beer, and you're like, got any good stuff lately to work with? Any good tools? And I got this mic. It's pretty cool. I like it on snare. Yeah, that's my review section. That's what I told Andy Hong, the reviews editor. I said, this is how I want you to present it. I want these used on real sessions. I want them used in commercial studios or under pressure, and I want, honest reports about the stuff. And I'm not interested in somebody just being like, this $99 mic is no U47, it's like, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
You judge the equipment at the price point and the intent of the manufacturer. So some reviews might be of a cheap, like ART thing that, is very affordable. And you don't try to say it's not a 1176. You just say it's this other kind of compressor. It works pretty well for the price point.
Yeah.
I mean, people have accused us of sucking up to manufacturers and stuff. And honestly, most of the time that they try to point something out, it'll be someone who doesn't advertise with us. or something, or used to, or doesn't, or now, or currently, or, it's kind of like, well, how are we sucking up to someone when they're not even giving us money? And that's
Yeah.
been a frequent accusation. I think if you look at our reviews and you read them like with the idea that they're the way I presented that, hanging out, having a beer, that it makes more sense. It's just peer to peer. I use this, it works.
I don't think you gain anything by trashing something.
It doesn't make any sense. I once wrote a review of a really expensive pop filter that the Trans Audio Group was carrying. I think they still carry it. It's like $200, $300, $400. I don't know. It's the most expensive pop filter. And I put it up against, like a Stedman or something, like just the pressed metal one. And I just went back and forth. And I was like, really, it isn't any different. I'm happy with the $25 metal one. And Brad said, do you have to even run this? I mean, this is for a certain kind of audience. This is for someone who wants to just go over the top with their pop filter and spend all this money. I'm like, great, then we won't run the review.
Yeah.
And he's great. I'm happy.
Yeah. I used to write speaker reviews for EQ.
Yeah.
I did it for 5 years. And for the most part, we were told you can be negative, but you have to be able to you have to be negative in between the lines, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
That was okay. I felt good about that because if people are watching and paying attention, they could figure it out. But it's not that I would be intentionally negative. Most of the time, I would just send the unit back and say, when you get a new model, let me know. And I'll do it, when you get an upgrade. Or even, just call them and say, hey, am I hearing this right? Am I doing something wrong? At least give them a chance. But there's only one product that I can remember that I just said, this is terrible. I can't run this. And it was a speaker that came and gone in a flash. So I'm happy that I never actually did anything on it. But boy, I was conflicted. It's like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. But on the other hand, you have a responsibility to your readers.
Yeah. I think when something is really hyped and you find that it's not really a great product, it usually kind of dies off fast, like I said earlier. So it's just kind of like you can ignore it for a year or two and then the company goes away,
Yeah, right.
The thing I do like to do is to try to point out products that are really great, that are not getting a lot of marketing and are made, the person maybe just makes a great product, but doesn't have any sense of like even how to get ads out there maybe or something.
Yeah.
So I try to find those kind of products too and say, hey, look, this is really good. Like don't ignore it. And they might not keep making these for years too.
Yeah. Right. I want to talk about lynda.com. You and I both do videos for Lynda.
Yeah.
And Lynda has been terrific for me. I really enjoyed the experience with the people, with the process, with everything. What's your feeling on it?
Same thing. I mean, it might sound like we drank some Kool-Aid or something, but my experience, I really enjoy working with all the people there. Everyone's really nice and positive. Like going to the campus is amazing because meeting all these different people in different fields, and they're all like really smiling and enthusiastic about their work, and you're kind of like, wow, this is a good place to work.
Right. It's very upbeat.
Yeah, it's really cool, and I love having the opportunity. I was going to hire a camera crew and shoot the kind of videos I ended up doing just to give away, just to kind of promote my studio or myself. And to be able to do the same thing and have a professional crew work on and film and edit and direct you and everything. And then to have it, to earn royalties on it when people view it and stuff is just beyond my wildest dreams, honestly. It's nice to have a little extra income. And it brings me work. I mean, I get people that watch the videos and then they email me, go, can you mix my record?
Yeah.
So that's kind of cool. They see that you got a good bedside manner and you're a positive person and you got a lot of tricks up your sleeve, and then I get work from it. So that's I never thought that was going to happen.
Yeah, that's very cool. Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Really?
How many courses have you done?
I have a mixing course and a recording course. And then I have the weekly course that's going on right now, the weekly audio tip thing. And then that might morph into something else. I've been throwing ideas around, but we'll see which ones stick.
Yeah.
They're fun. They were pretty intense. The first two courses I did were shot in about 10 days. up here at my studio. And that was just like every day, go, 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 it was a lot of work.
Yeah, I remember them telling me that, what they're doing, because I was in the middle of post-production on something when they were getting ready to pull the recording team out and go up and see you.
Yeah, it was fun.
I want to talk about your recording workshops. So
Yeah.
I took notice that you're doing these workshops. Tell me about them.
People used to ask like if they could sit in on sessions or intern and I really, because my studio is really open for freelancers and stuff, it's really hard to have interns around. You can have an assistant, which we have one available to hire, who knows the place really, really well. But having an intern that was just kind of there to move things around or something, it just doesn't feasible. And people would always kind of ask me to, go to schools and talk and things like that. But a lot of times it doesn't pay real well. And I went and talked to a school here in town that was kind of a private arts college or something. And, they were like, well, you only have a bachelor's degree and they would, you'd be on some kind of teacher's income, which is pretty pitiful. And I thought, wait a minute, why don't I just host things like a one weekend? I can make more money than working in that place for 3 weeks,
Yeah.
So I started doing these workshops, like 10 students max. They bring in the way the format now, it's had different formats, but I've kind of settled on one that works really good for home recordists or people that have small little studios or whatever they're doing. And people bring in like 1 or 2 songs that they've tracked and mixed. And then we listen to the mix and I just go right from that. You break it down and criticize it in a very gentle way.
Yeah.
The whole class will listen and I'll be like, did anyone notice this? And everyone's like, oh yeah, that's kind of problematic, and then we'll listen to the multi-tracks or the Pro Tools session and we'll isolate, like problematic tracking techniques and mixing techniques that are out of hand, or, why are you putting every single plugin is on a preset, things like that, the things that people kind of fall into that they don't know, because all these people are like the same way I learned kind of on my own. They're learning on their own and they're making very, pretty big mistakes, or they're trying to tackle something like parallel compression without understanding really how to do it, or they read something in TapeOp and they misappropriate the information and misapply the information,
Yeah.
So it's fun to take them and and when I first started doing it, I thought, how could I know so much more than other people? But when I started doing it, it's real easy. Even if someone has a pretty good mix, to just look for the things that need help and to talk and then show that this is a good example of how to track drums at home, or
Yeah.
So it's pretty informative. It's really fun. It's a really great environment. People end up trading emails and keeping in touch and stuff too.
Is it for 1 day?
2 days. I do a weekend thing. I also do like a one-on-one version of that where someone comes for just a single day and I just go through like, maybe 3 songs of theirs and we really pick them apart and I'll go run in the live room and I'll show them miking techniques and stuff, and I love doing it because it's a little bit routine, kind of ends up, it's like those shows where they fix bars and hotels and stuff.
Yeah.
Those reality shows, it kind of ends up being a little bit of a formula to it. But, people, when they see that stuff applied to their work, it really resonates. Like everybody leaves and goes home and sends me emails and say, everything's sounding better now, just because they've learned how to mic things and how to mix things a little bit better on their material,
Yeah. It makes a big difference. The personal touch.
Yeah, I think you could read about someone, you could see my video or something, I'd show you the same thing. But if I'm showing it on their music, it really resonates,
One of the things I noticed is when you write something or if you read something, many times you don't get the full picture. You get a piece of it and maybe a big piece of it, but sometimes you'll miss the little thing that really makes the big difference on the technique.
Yeah.
And and that's the thing that, it's very easy to point out if it's one-on-one.
Yeah, I think so, because then they'll be like, well, wait, where were you putting the mic on the snare again? And they'll look at it from multiple angles and it'll make more sense.
I just saw one of those things. I love the Glyn Johns drum miking technique, but it never quite sounded the way I thought it should. And then I ran across a video of Glyn in a school. And he's
Oh yeah,
walking
I
around
think
and he's
that's
showing.
from Cuyahoga Community College.
He says the little, one thing that makes it worth it. And he says, oh yeah, you have to set the preamps about 10 dB hotter than you normally would, or else it's not going to sound good. Bing. It's like, oh, okay. And sure enough, I went back and I did that, and wow, it came alive. It was great.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of push it.
Yeah.
Just push. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense too.
But again, you read that about that technique, and I've used it for years, and it's good, but I don't think it's what, they were getting back then. That's why.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, totally.
What scares you about the music business?
I don't like that it is a speculative business. I get that it is. It probably has to be that people speculate on artists and careers, but I don't appreciate that everything is run in that manner. And it's a very high failure rate if you look at things from a commercial standpoint.
Yeah.
And I think that I see music as art, obviously. And, even the most unappreciated album might be something that 20 years from now somebody digs up and heralds as a really breakthrough, undiscovered thing. And it's just hard to have people say that something's a failure, or that album came out. Well, I was thinking about Tusk the other day, Fleetwood Mac, and they always call it like the big failure, but it sold like 20 million copies or something. I don't know, right. But it didn't sell 40, million, or like groomers,
Yeah. When I go and I give talks at schools, I always put up a slide, and it's a magician's wand.
Yeah.
And I put magic. And the thing about it is, when you have a hit, you capture lightning in a bottle for that split second.
Yeah.
And even if you don't like the song or you don't like the artist, you have to appreciate the fact that they caught lightning there. They caught that lightning in the bottle. There's something that millions of people really dig. So
right.
If nothing else, you have to respect that fact. Even if you don't like it, you can at least respect it and learn from it. So I try to impress that on, people I talk to, young people, and hopefully they'll be at least more open to listening to things.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing in our field is to be really listen to a lot of styles of music too, and understand, even if you don't like something, listen to the classic records in that genre and figure out why they work and why people like them. And I'm amazed how many times I know more about music, or even the music my clients like, than they do. Like I know more history. I'll be like, well, have you heard their first album? And they're like, what?
Yeah.
And it's like, that's your favorite band, you never even heard all their records? It's crazy. So that, I think having that breadth of knowledge is really important to be able to understand how to get sounds, or to produce, or how to conceive of stuff. And I find that, I don't know how someone could get to where I'm at in my 50s, from zero to 50 or whatever, but it's also like just kind of amazing to me when people just don't have they haven't listened to a lot of music, or as much as maybe they should have, to get to be where they're at. And I find myself kind of giving them a list of records to go check out, sometimes after.
Yeah, I hear you. Okay. Last question.
Yeah.
What's the best piece of business advice that you ever learned along the way, or someone imparted to you?
I'd say the best thing I've definitely learned myself is don't approach like a recording studio as like a build it and they will come kind of thing. And don't like, I get emails all the time from people that are like, we've just spent, $400,000 building this studio, write about it. And I'm like, I don't care. It hasn't made any records, right?
Yeah, right.
Like, no one's recorded there. It's a room full of gear, like big deal. So you go to Vintage King and see the same stuff,
Yeah.
It's like, I'm not going to write about Vintage King because it's not a studio, So it's like, I think that, there's a misunderstanding that the equipment drives the business. There used to be a lockdown. Like, if you had a 2-inch 24 track and you were one of 5 people in Portland that did, you got business, right?
Yeah, right.
There was a way to corner the market. But that's gone, and that's fine. I think that's really healthy that that's gone. But it's also like, you have to, if you're presenting a commercial studio, you have to up your game now as well. Instead of being able to lock it down with a 24 track tape deck, you got to lock it down with a Neve console and a tube mic and things that people can't afford to own at home.
Yeah. Right.
And things that make great records. You're also, the gear comes after the work, like having albums out that people are actually buying and listening to and care about is the only calling card that matters for a commercial studio or a producer or whoever.
Yeah. I mean, there's no business plan involved. A lot of times it's just gear acquisition only, without the thought of what to do afterwards.
I went and visited a studio that's being built in town here, and it looks really great and everything, but there were some things that I was like, oh, I don't know if I would have done this way, and it was definitely being built by a guy who's a musician and not as much a recording engineer. And, you kind of, depending where you're coming from, you probably take the priorities in a different way. But I think of this like when I used to be a waiter and wait tables. Like, it's a service industry, and you have to think about the client all the time. And people come into my studio, and on the back of the producer's desk is a USB charging port and a bunch of power strip chart things. Because what is the first thing they got to do but plug in stuff to charge, and their phones and their computers, and there's a 1/4-inch stereo jack input, so you can plug things into our monitors from back there.
Excellent.
And listen. These are very practical things that everyone needs, but half the time I go to a studio, none of that's in place. So I look at it like we don't have a person sitting at a front desk. We don't have, it's a very low budget studio, but the artist needs are all taken care of. There's things there that they need. There's extra charging cables for all the different kinds of iPhones and stuff. Everything's all there. There's filtered water, and there's coffee, and there's a fridge, and there's all the stuff that you need. And so many times I go to a studio, you can't even get water,
Right.
Yankee studio. It's crazy.
Well, this has been cool. Thanks for spending time with me today, Larry. This is great.
Yeah. Man, thank you.
It's always
fun.
Always fun to talk to you, and I hope we can do this more often, actually.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks, Bobby.
To find out more about Larry, go to larrycrane.com. That's Larry-Crane.com, Larry-Crane.com. Thanks for listening and being in my inner circle. Remember, if you have any questions or comments, you can send them to questions@BobbyOInnerCircle.com. We love your comments and we love your questions. Many thanks to Steve Cherubino. He's the host of the EDM Producer Podcast at EDMMR.com, and he also put the show together. Many, 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 many thanks, Steve. To listen to other episodes of Bobby Owsinski's Inner Circle, go to BobbyOwsinski.com and select the podcast tab, or you can go to BobbyOInnerCircle.com, or you can find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Mixcloud, and now Google Play. At BobbyOwsinski.com and BobbyOInnerCircle.com, you'll find a sign-up form for my newsletter and for alerts for new podcasts. This is Bobby Owsinski. I'll see you next time.